Chandrasekhan is currently the program manager at Arrow, and her key focus areas is to amplify the voices of women, girls, and young people with a focus on gender equality and SRHR in key advocacy forums and convenings at the national, regional, and global space. So I would like to call Sharmala, please claim the stage alongside with our speakers today. There will be Ali Raza Jilani. I think Ali will joining virtually. Yuk again. Yuk Ratna, I will help that you can get some water first. And then there is Sri Yeswan Tadimala, also from MGCY, joining virtually. Shamala, I will give the floor to you, please.
Good morning again, everyone. I'm Shamla, and I'll be your moderator for the panel 1 today, Pact for the Future, Declaration on Future Generations and Global Digital Compact, and Introduction to the Outcome Documents of the Summit of the Future. So this panel will focus on 3 outcome documents from the Summit of the Future, which includes Pact for the Future, Declaration on Future Generations, and the Global Digital Compact from the lens of young people. Our esteemed speakers in this panel will share with us how young people can be effective partners in advancing these outcome documents in the Asia and Pacific region. Let's already hear from our panelists. First on my list is Ali Jilani, who's joining us online today. Ali is a development practitioner striving for democratization of state and society with over a decade's experience in policy advocacy across regional and global levels. He leads the advocacy group of APRCM to realize development justice for all. Ali, please share with us your insight on the Pact for the Future as well as the financial architecture. And in your opinion, what does the Summit of the Future outcomes need to include to leave no one behind, including young people in all their diversities, in sustainable development? Over to you, Ali.
Okay, fair enough. Could you kindly go to my slides so I can just take start? Okay, thank you. So my focus today is to cover the financial architecture reforms, which is basically part of the Pact for the Future, but that is not something that I'm excited about. I'm actually excited about talking to all of you young people because I happen to have graduated from that category already with the gray hair that you can see. You know, I'm going to try to paint a picture for you here, which may not be pleasant in a way, given the criticality of the situation and times that we're living in. And I'm going to invite your critical reflection as well to try to make sure that your participation across these processes is as meaningful as possible and is not tokenized as much as it has been previously. So the first thing that I wanted to cover on the first slide, if it could be brought on. Yeah. So we know for a fact from the Global Sustainable Development Report 2023, as part of the methodology, what they did was they tried to review about 36 targets. And unfortunately, only 2 of them happen to be on track as we are almost midway of the SDGs timeline. While 8 of the targets are regressing. And most of you are young enough to not be familiar with what was before the SDGs, which was the Millennium Development Goals. It was as much of a shambles as is the SDGs, that we see, albeit with the difference that, you and me have the opportunity of being involved with the SDGs related processes. And some of our folks who were working on the MDGs were not so lucky to have been doing so. The other thing that we have to cover here It's a legacy of like multilateral failures. It's not the first that's failed. If you can stick to the first slide, please. The one prior to that. Yeah. So as far as the Asian Pacific region is concerned, we know for a fact now that the Regional Economic and Social Commission produced a report in 2024 suggesting that the region is not going to be able to achieve the SDGs by 2062. Now, that projection is based on 53% of the available data. That means we do not know how the 47% of the unknown that is yet to be measured looks like. That means that we could be stretched well into the 22nd century as far as the achievement of the SDGs is concerned, which is a very bad situation, especially because you're just basing all of this on whatever we have available as part of the SDGs, meaning that it does not have the emergent crises, meaning the crisis of inequalities, the crisis of debt, the crisis of cost of living, triple planetary crisis, authoritarian governance crises. All of those factors are not part of this projection, right? And still we're in such a troubled situation. Meaning that usually across multilateral processes, as you grow older into them, you will see that consensus is prioritized ahead of critical consideration. And that is where I invite the young people to start questioning and challenging the ideas of multilateral ambition, vis-a-vis the slogans like transformation and so on that these frameworks tend to attach to themselves. On the next slide, then I've tried to cover a little bit of a need to understand what some of the issues are with the international financial architecture without going into the technical details of that. In some simple terms, you see as far as the challenges, if you could kindly go to the next slide, please. Some of the challenges that we have, you see, it's not just the UN that derives the reforms. There's a lot of political economics in the background also. You must be following the media in terms of the developments concerning the BRICS, which is coming about. So there is a lot of geopolitics involved also into some of the reforms and how they are packaged. So it may not just be the Summit of the Future or the Pact of the Future or the SDGs failures that are bringing about the international financial architecture reforms, but actually also the emergence of alternative frameworks, alternative mechanisms where other possibilities are there for countries to engage. So then you have a package which is sort of packaged as a reforms. So that's one thing. The other issue that we have is what I wanted to cover here in the political economy of these reforms is the idea of the tricky trio. So the World Bank Group, the IMF, which are called the Bretton Woods institutions, alongside the World Trade Organizations, have done more harm around the world since they're coming about compared to the good. Now, I'm not going to play politically correct here. It's based on factual emphasis, and I've just tried to put a few things as straight as possible without getting into technicalities. What are the challenges that we have with the World Bank, for instance? The first is something called Washington Consensus. It simply means that pushing smaller countries into neoliberal trade regimes and lending practices where you tend to privatize everything from essential services such as education, health, social protection, and so on and so forth, to broader issues around regulation of markets and protection of labor and environmental standards and so on and so forth, right? So that's been basically serving as weakening the legal apparatus across the global south in particular. The other issue that we have is World Bank doesn't happen to be in Oxford or in Harvard or doesn't have any intellectual credentials. So why do we have this as the knowledge bank? Even some of our critical terminological references in development discourse happen to be defined by the World Bank. which happens to have so many inherent contradictions within its own operations, right? And I've quoted somebody here who happened to be, it's not me saying, it's Stiglitz, who was the chief economist at the World Bank, who said that the economic reforms IMF and World Bank require as conditionalities for their lending have often proved to be as counterproductive and sometimes devastating for recipient countries and their people. It's the chief economist who was then forced out to resign, right? So all of those inherent contradictions, and then we're somehow using all of those terminological references coming from a bank who happens to posit itself as the one producing knowledge and defining stuff for us. So that's also another challenge, which you will understand when you understand the intricacies and nuances of development operations. The other issue that we've had is the systematic underrepresentation of global South countries. Both of these institutions came about after the post-World War. World Bank on the macroeconomic side, and the fund, which is the IMF, at a quick restructuring of how to maintain exchange rates and so on and so forth. But both of them have been extremely problematic, and nothing was as critical in our recent memory as the COVID-enforced economic downturn. All of the countries around the world were suffering. There was a lot of push that we need to invest in healthcare and so on and so forth. But even during COVID-19, 78% of the programs that IMF negotiated pushed for further belt-tightening measures, meaning that austerity across countries, meaning that your public funds should not go into healthcare, social protection, and providing people with some kind of incentives if they've lost their jobs as the COVID-enforced economic downturns and so on and so forth. And then the third player in this, which the Pact for the Future, as a matter of fact, hasn't even properly touched, is the World Trade Organization. And just one example quickly covering is, so when 76%, more than 76% of the global population had not even gotten a single dose of COVID vaccine, at that time, a ministerial conference happened in Geneva of WTO. And despite a strong recommendation coming from the General Assembly to remove something called trade-related intellectual property stipulations, TRIPS. So the General Assembly was saying that WTO should remove TRIPS so that countries such as Sri Lanka, Pakistan, Bangladesh, smaller countries, could be in a position to develop the quality of vaccines such as Pfizer, for instance, right? And be able to vaccine their populations and so on and so forth, while 76% of the global population was without a single dose, and the WTO did not heed to that recommendation. So those are the kind of challenges that we have, with these institutions, which is critical to understand, before we move into what then is being sold to us in the name of, the so-called reforms. Next slide, please. So in the Pact for the Future, this is what you get. Number one, reforms to turbocharge the 2030 agenda as to whatever is, a set of challenges that we have with the SDGs. They're going to try to reform it. The purpose of which it says is to strengthen trust in global public institutions and enhance their responsiveness. Categorically, in the World Bank and IMF reforms, they've tried to cover three things. First is to enhance the representation of the countries from the global south in the governance and decision making of these institutions. The other is to provide them access to financing, so that they can look into their development priorities. And the other is facilitate debt restructuring and debt relief. And then there is this when appropriate. So as you will grow more gray hair, like myself, you will understand that this is where the devil is located, in this when appropriate. So there will always be an excuse or two to never provide debt relief, even in the most critical situations such as COVID-19, when more than 118 countries were at the risk of default because of the debt distress that they were facing, vis-a-vis COVID-related economic downturns, and then SDGs priorities and so on and so forth, right? And then they also have pitched here something as improved climate financing, which should focus on adaptation, which is a good thing. And then the final one, for which the modality is yet to be clarified, is going beyond GDP, meaning that it's not important to see growth as a measure by how much you earn, but also include some qualitative elements in terms of the quality of life, access to services, and so on and so forth, which will be something that we can call transformative if it is applied on the ground. Next slide, please. So here I've tried to cover a countermeasure to these reforms as to what the Pact for the Future does not cover, and the so-called transformation of those reforms. What should it entail if we are to call it transformative? For instance, official development assistance. So it's just 0.7%, 0.7% of gross national income of the global North countries. However, we see that commitment has never been fulfilled throughout. Right? There's not been a single year when Development Assistance Committee members, meaning the global North countries, have ever fulfilled the 0.7% of GNI commitment. And there are other patterns also, meaning that they double count financing through refugee costs that they have to invest, or if they have their trade, military, or political objectives, because of the fact that the global North tends to believe that it's an act of benevolence to provide funding in official development assistance than that of responsibility, where discussions around coloniality and so many other issues come to fore. The other issue that we have is of policy coherence or lack of it, meaning that you have crazy patterns here. For instance, illicit financial flows. So the multinational corporations operating from the global North take out $7.8 trillion out of the developing countries between 10 years, meaning 2004 to 2013. In the same time frame, we get only $1.2 trillion in development financing as a whole, right? So the developing countries lose more than $6 trillion more than what we receive in the aid packages, right? So that contradiction still remains. Illicit financial flows has now found a place in the Pact for the Future, but how is it going to be operationalized? How those policy structures are going to be improved is still something to be seen. The other issue is that last year we had a military spending globally of $2.4 trillion, whereas the official development assistance only stood at $214 billion per year. That is also another issue to look into. Now, they've announced something called stimulus package, which is SDGs stimulus. At the moment, as far as your SDGs shortfall is concerned, that's $4.2 trillion per year, whereas the stimulus only offers $500 billion per year. So it's 6 to 7 times below what it should be, right? And finally, the issue of debt relief, where there are so many challenges, and we are yet to have a comprehensive debt sustainability framework in focus. All of it is like creditor-centric, and there are a lot of issues with that. On to my final slide, please. I just wanted to quickly wrap it up now. So there is a, in a nutshell, international financial architecture reform is not going to be effective unless you bring in the nexus of trade, right? So the trade is completely missing, meaning the third piece of World Trade Organization, the related reforms are missing in the Pact. That's one massive omission, which has to be there if we are to make sure that war is not profitable over peace, neither disease over health, and nor deprivation over affluence, for that matter. And then finally is the issue of reforming the Security Council, where you have 3 European countries right now, 1 North American and 1 Asian, whereas Africans, the South Americans, and Pacific is out. There have been quite a few recommendations in the past, which could be utilized, but we're yet to have the language, even in the Rev 2 of the Pact for the Future, so the conversations are going there. We as APRSM believe that it's critical that we decolonize, deliberalize, and democratize to realize development for all. I thank you.
Thank you, Ali, for breaking down some of the complex factors that influence the Pact for the Future, and also highlighting some of the critical areas that the Pact for the Future could have included for it to be more inclusive and more effective. I now move to our next speaker, Yuk, whom you have already met. So Yug, we would like to hear from you on the Declaration of Future Generations. Could you give us an introduction to the Declaration on Future Generations and what it means to young people and their involvement in the sustainable development?
Thank you so much, Shamala. I think it would be better if you put up the slides because last time, oh, they're there. Yeah. So I'll be hopefully quick, and I think it's a bit of a challenge coming after Ali, who did such a great job in presenting the IFA, and what the previous presentation was really at the heart of what the Pact has to deliver, and will it deliver or not deliver is something that we will see when the third version comes out, but already there is a lot of shortfall, as he pointed out very excellently. So we'll just go through very quickly on what Declaration on Future Generation is. It's not as intensive as the previous PowerPoint. So if we go to the next slide, you must be familiar with this. I talked about it in the previous section, the previous session. And then at the bottom, I talked about that there are two annexes to the Pact, the Digital Compact and the Declaration on Future Generation. So we're talking about the Declaration on Future Generation now, and my colleague will talk just shortly about the Compact. So if we can go to the next slide. So what is DFG? It's an abbreviation for Declaration on Future Generation. So this was mandated by UN General Assembly that all the countries will get together and create this declaration. Now, it is important to remember that the idea of a declaration on future generation or future generation as a topic is not something that just came around. It's been existing in the UN for a long time, and there have been countless commitments to take future generations into account, including in UN Charter. I think that has some language around this. And then when our Common Agenda report was published in the 75th anniversary of the UN, following the 75th anniversary of the UN in 2021, the UN Secretary General then invited member states and stakeholders to create specific steps to account for the interests of the future generation in national and global decision making, and then to sort of consolidate all of that into a declaration. So basically, and then the process started in 2022 under the leadership of Netherlands and Fiji, and then it was Netherlands and Jamaica. So Netherlands and Jamaica were the two member states that were like facilitating. So they would call for meetings, take the inputs, compile them, present another draft. So that's what they do. So this is a bit of a history into how it came about. I also have a table that talks about future generations in different UN documents. I can share that with you if you want. I couldn't fit on the slide, so that's why it's not there. But just in terms of what that process has been. So then moving on to the next slide, since the process is started. So this is a summary of what has happened from March this year until 19th of August. So it started with the presentation of a zero draft. So zero draft is basically when the first or the 0th version of the declaration or elements of it are presented. Followed by that, there were negotiations on that, written inputs, and then you would see in May, 3rd of May, the Rev 1, which is the revision 1 of the DFG was presented. And then there were negotiations throughout May, and then in, you would see at some point in June, 17th of June, the Rev 2, which is the second version of the Declaration on Future Generation was then presented. And then followed by that, there were other more readings. And now finally, we're at a point where the final or supposed to be final version of the declaration was presented on 13th August. And they gave a deadline of the 19th August for silence procedure. So silence procedure is a process in the UN that refers to, hey, here is a document. If you all don't say anything, if nobody objects, we'll consider that it's adopted. So it's called agreement by silence procedure. So what we saw in Global Digital Compact, when the third version of the Digital Compact was presented, a number of member states broke silence procedure. I'm not fully sure. I mean, I've been traveling since 19, so I have to find out what happened. I'm pretty sure that something may have happened, but I don't know if they have yet broken the silence procedure or not. And if a silence procedure is broken, it only takes one member state to break it. Then they have to, again, sort of do a closed process to take feedback from different countries and point out. But still, I think the third revision is a good basis to look at it. So there is no declaration right now. We have the third revision, and we'll be talking about that. And hopefully that is what, would end up being the final declaration. So if you go to the next slide. So the declaration, before we come to declaration, and then again, go to the next slide again. So what is the landscape of stakeholders in this? So we talked about landscape of stakeholders in the Pact itself. and then zooming in into the landscape of stakeholder engagement in the Declaration on Future Generation. So they were online consultations, similar to what they were for Pact. So Netherlands and Jamaica called for various online consultations. Civil society, major groups and stakeholders gave input. Youth often hosted their own consultation. There were conversations about it in the UN Civil Society Conference, and then activities led by CSOs themselves, such as the ECOSOC Youth Forum in 2024, which focused on the summit. And then what were the challenges? Then again, what we discussed this earlier, no direct engagement in the negotiation. That held true for the DFG as well, although there were some sessions of Declaration on Future Generation when they were presenting the REV. So not negotiating on it, but presenting and taking inputs. That's when they allowed civil society to sit in the room. And it was, I think, 2 or 3 sessions like that, 2 or 3 sessions out of, let's say, 15 sessions in which you could sit and observe. But those sessions were also where member states were giving their reactions to something, as opposed to making changes that, oh, in this paragraph, we want to see this language or that language. So it was slightly more progressive than the Pact, but still majority of the negotiations were closed. And again, loudest voices often seen as the most legitimate voices. There are many, again, similar problem that we often see when some things are very New York centric, that bigger organizations, think tanks that have access are able to sort of advocate more. And then it often leads to marginalization of young people from the global south. We have seen a lot of NGOs in UK, and I mean, nothing against them, right? Taking lead and doing advocacy, but we haven't really seen movements from the global south come forward and say that this is what we want to see, or that is what we want to not see in our declaration. At least it has not been as accessible. There are people that have more access than often are seen as legitimate voices in the space, which is unfortunate. Moving on to the next slide. So what does the declaration itself contain? So it has 4 sections: preamble, guiding principles, commitments, and actions. So 1 to 11, paragraph 12 to 21, paragraph 22 to 34, and actions on a paragraph 35 to 43. You can, if you search Declaration on Future Generation, you can find it and read it. And in the next slide, you will see what are some of the issues addressed. So under guiding principles, commitments, and action plan. So this is an overview. A lot of that is generic text, if what we call it in, at least in MDCY team. Generic text means that you're not actually committing to something. You just put together things that sound nice and reaffirming what has happened in the past. So that's what all of these sections do. So they talk about promoting global peace, security, human rights, fostering intergenerational solidarity, inclusivity, advocating gender equality, rights of marginalized groups, govern ethical use of technology, address climate change. Then commitments are to work towards addressing global equalities, empowering women, combating poverty, and ensuring equitable access to technology, healthcare, education. And then action plan, that how do you use science and technology? We want the governance to be more inclusive and resilient. So think of this as like more cross-cutting principles or ideologies that were you sort of push forward. And if you go to the next slide, is when kind of rubber hits the road kind of a thing. So these were the 3 main recommendations that have come out, and they are in the last paragraph of the Declaration on Future Generation. So these are the 3 operative things. So these are the things that have to now happen, kind of, if Rev 3 is the version that's approved, or if they edit it out. So 3 things that were then given as part of the declaration, and it says operational item. And perhaps the only important bit of it is says that it takes note of Secretary General's proposal to appoint a Secretary General, to appoint a special envoy on future generation. So it does not necessarily say that envoy is a good thing or a bad thing. It just says, oh, we take note that SG wants to do something like this. The previous versions of the declaration had a more direct language saying that we want an envoy. You would like to request Secretary General to appoint an envoy, or decides to appoint an envoy. And now it came to sort of a very neutral language that, oh, we are taking note of a proposal from SG to appoint an envoy. The second point is more decisive, as you can see, that it says it decides to convene an inclusive high-level plenary meeting of the GA on the future generations to review the implementation of this declaration during the 83rd session of the General Assembly, and provide updates on the action plan and safeguarding of the interests of the future generation. So this, again, this is providing some future space for this issue to be developed. Although I can tell you that earlier proposals included things like establishing a committee on future generation, or establishing a permanent agenda item in the work of GA on future generation. So those things were not done. So permanent agenda item means that if something is a permanent agenda item, it's discussed every year. It's not discussed only in one session and then a few years later, it's not an agenda. So that was another thing that was done. And then the third one is about requests for SG to prepare a report, for consideration during the 82nd session. So yet another report by the SG. So this is what is there in the current third version of the declaration. And I think this is the last slide. Can we go to the next one? Yeah. So that is a very quick rundown of what DSG is. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Yug. So, from this morning, you've heard several times about providing language inputs. You also heard about the term zero draft. So when the Pact for the Future was first talked about, they had this consultation, from December 2023. Arrow and the team, we have actively engaged in the different consultations, and we've provided language inputs to the zero draft, the Rev 1, Rev 2. And, Sai also said the UN Civil Society conference that happened in Nairobi. So Arrow made a oral intervention at this space, asking for reference on sexual and reproductive health and rights to be included in the Pact for the Future document. In the zero draft, there were no mentions on SRHR. And a week later, when the revised version was released, there is reference on SRHR. So, our efforts, you will see results, right? We just have to continue doing what we are doing. And it's still there in Rev 2, and let's see what happens in September. Hopefully it stays. Right, now we move to our next speaker, who's also joining us online, Sri Yash Tadimala from MGCY Science Policy Interface, India. Sri Yash Tadimala is a PhD student in the College of Computing and Informatics at UNC Charlotte. He serves as the technology focal point for the United Nations MGCY Science Policy Interface and the president-elect of the World Student Platform for Engineering, Education and Development, SPEED. Yash will introduce us to the Global Digital Compact. Over to you, Yash.
Thank you so much. Quick question. Are you able to get my audio clearly?
Yes.
Awesome. Give me 1 second. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, but not in slide mode yet.
Are you able to see the first slide?
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I wish I could join you all in person, but youth advocacy calls us in multiple directions, and we try to do a lot. So before I get started with the Global Digital Compact, I wanted to share a little context on the science, technology, innovation space. And in the UN, what is the approach to science, technology, innovation, some background on processes and mechanisms that have taken place over the last few years. I want to say decade, because a lot of push for science and innovation has happened in the last decade, and how they have shaped the Global Digital Compact. The first thing to begin with is when it comes to science, technology, innovation, the UN often has had this layered approach that the data collection, monitoring, planning happens at the national level, and at the international or global level, it's often reporting. It's creating good use cases from national programs, and then sharing those at the global platform and having other member states adopt those good practices, and also pushing for a more data-driven approach to SDG tracking, and also to use science as a way to accelerate SDGs. And those are the words that you often hear at the global level. And when it comes to STI, specifically Science Technology Facilitation Mechanism, which is the mechanism through which civil society is engaged in UN for the science, technology, innovation, it happens through this one document. It primarily happens through the high-level political forum. Many processes that happen at our country level, regional levels, they feed into the high-level political forum, which happens during the time period of June or July. I'm sorry, I'm sure people will correct me in the room, but it happens during July, I think. And in the high-level political forum, the reports are compiled and executive summaries are created, and they then are used to decide on next steps, on what to do, what is working, what is not working. Specifically, there are three main documents for science, technology, innovation before the Global Digital Compact came into picture. And again, I request Sajar or Riju to please text in the chat when I hit the 3-minute mark and 2-minute mark. And it is the Global Sustainable Development Report, or the GSDR. And this is a report that is written by a group of 10 scientists that are appointed by the Secretary General on what is the state of SDGs around the world and how science can be used to accelerate them. And often I tell people the GSDR is the one important report that you have to read out of the HLPF on actionable next steps. And the civil society, the major groups are invited to engage with the GSDR process and feed into the GSDR process. And this happens at the national level, at the global level, at regional levels. And that's like one place where civil society organizations used to engage. But over the last 10 years, we've had a lot of forums and conferences come up as technology continued to become a bigger deal. Everybody knows that technology or science was not a part of the original SDGs, but it is a part of every SDG. And that recognition of how important technology development, innovation has led to now all the SDGs having tracking on how much they're using innovation and technology to promote the meeting of the SDGs. The STI forum specifically is the mechanism that happens at New York that collects all the reports and information coming from the national bodies and then sets the agenda for the high-level political forum. There's also the Internet Governance Forum, which is happening in December in Saudi Arabia. There's the WSIS Forum, which is also another information technology governance forum. There's also the United Nations Commission on Science Technology for Development, the AI for Good Summit, which happens in Geneva, and the new High-Level Advisory Board. And many of these processes were happening with their own mandates. The Office of the Secretary General Envoy on Technology, which came into being in the last 10 years, has now taken up the mantle on coordinating all of these. And previously, we used to have an Office of Secretary General Envoy on Youth, which has now transitioned into the Youth Office. And one of the calls to actions from the Global Digital Compact is to move the Secretary General Envoy on Technology Office to a UN Technology Office. And the Youth SBI platform, which is the platform I'm representing here today, is a cross-cutting platform in MGCY, which ensures that young people are involved in all these processes. With that context, the Global Digital Compact, the process started way back in August 30, 2023. And the things that the compact originally started out with were focused on connectivity, avoiding internet fragmentation, data protection, human rights, accountability for online content, regulating artificial intelligence, global communications in the digital realm. And those were the original ideas that the Secretary General's common agenda gave as a call to action to member states. And most of the member states agreed that these were things that they want to work on and they think are important for us to achieve the SDGs. Since then, we've had MGCY, or the Major Group for Children and Youth, has engaged in all of the informal consultations. We've been partners in stakeholder sessions, organizing them, giving interventions. We were there at the Civil Society Conference. And I'm going to refer to Yugatna's information on what she shared on the process. I'm not going to spend more time. So if you scan that QR code, it will take you to the latest revision Rev 3 of the Global Digital Compact. I encourage you to scan the QR code, get the document and read it on your own. But the way the document is structured, it has objectives, it has commitments, and it has actions. And these are the objectives that that came out of the Common Agenda document and shaped what are the things that the countries were willing to agree on as the bare minimum. The objectives were focused on closing digital divides and accelerating progress, expanding inclusion and benefits for digital economy for all, fostering an open, inclusive, safe digital space, responsible, interoperable data governance, and international governance on artificial intelligence. And again, Yugratna was, and again, it's really important to recognize that though it is a digital compact, it is very much an intergovernmental negotiated compact, a document, and there's a lot of political interest, private interest, and also power interest in how the world functions and how the digital technologies are going to shape the world. Some countries do want to keep a lot of the technology development in their hands. And again, I'm just going to talk about some high-level things that we found were not enough in the Global Digital Compact. In the connectivity chapter, again, there's a lot of good things that the Rev 3, we've gotten a lot of success in getting a lot of inclusion on gender, including mental health, including children and youth. The original Rev 1 did not have any of those. So we've made a lot of progress through our negotiations and interventions and using New York as the base. But in the connectivity chapter, there's a lot of focus on capacity building, which is basically this rush by countries to get everybody to have access to internet as fast as we can, as cheap as we can. But at what cost? Who is paying for this internet? And what does it come with when someone is paying for something, they'll always expect something back. And what is the cost of this internet access? And who is collecting the data once you get access to this internet? And is internet in everybody's hand really a good thing? Those are questions that the compact does not address. The compact paints a very rosy picture on getting everybody access, but it doesn't necessarily address all the risks. In the digital literacy skills and capacity section, a big win was the inclusion of the words gender and vulnerable groups. Rev 1 did not have the word gender in it. It was specifically focused on women and girls and did not recognize the non-binariness of gender. That is something we pushed for. Even the world vulnerable group populations, we pushed for it and we got those words in there. Another concerning part in the compact is in the digital public goods and digital public infrastructure section. There's a lot of power pull and push between member states in this specific section on there is no accountability on who is doing the transfer of technology, who is facilitating it, and the modalities of that process, and also who owns the IP and access to these technologies that will be used by developing countries or underdeveloped countries to build that infrastructure. What happens if after 30 years, a developed country that has given these resources decides to take it back? There's nothing about it. And also there is in the section about expanding inclusion, it does not take into consideration the gender nuances of financial behaviors. So the expansion inclusion in digital economy is basically getting everybody to do their finances and banking through mobile phones or the internet. Again, which does not take into consideration the nuances of gender financial behaviors in some countries, and also indigenous groups and vulnerable populations who will be pushed into buying into these systems and power structures that come with adopting more digital technologies into their societies and way of life. I know I'm coming up on time, so I'll wrap up with 3 more things. For the fostering inclusive, open, safe, and secure digital space section, the biggest challenge has been that this section is very focused on inviting the private sector as a partner to member states and and using their resources and infrastructure and funding to do a lot of the projects and programs, which is good because it is holding these private sector companies, which have built a lot of money, accountable. But the challenge with this is that civil society has been mostly pushed out of that process. And with the next section on data privacy and data exchange and everything, again, there is no reference to data colonization and no reference to civil society organizations, which is a trend we have seen multiple times in the Pact. And again, I think I want to conclude by saying a lot of the follow-up mechanisms in the compact do not call for civil society organizations. And as young people, it is our job to get engaged and push at every opportunity to have our voice heard in all of these processes. And feel free to scan the QR code on this link. It's a way for you to get engaged with the Science Policy Interface platform. We have a lot of, we're recruiting for them, and we are pushing for Asia Pacific region's representation in the processes. Thank you.
Thank you, Yash, for taking us through the compact. I now open the floor for questions and comments.
Hello, good morning again, Carl from the Philippines. My question is particularly on the REP, given that there's a list of activities where young people are consulted for some of the areas, but we are really interested because we are asking and we are talking within our colleagues in the Philippines if they are part of that activities during the revision, because we already reviewed the document and we see there's a lot of things that need to be improved, given that many of the languages that ensures the adolescent and young people are really part of it are not that really mentioned. Like for example, in terms of the crisis as is mentioned, however, in the conflict, given that right now as of speaking, there are 12 countries that really facing conflict that mentioned the Gaza, etc., Congo. And also, in terms of the inclusivity, there are not mentioning when it comes to different diverse sexuality, including the transgender people. And also, for those in connection with the conflict, is the refugees, asylum seekers, stateless person is not even mentioned in the document. And there's a lot of things that need to be mentioned in the document to ensure that as we are talking about the future and the inclusivity of it, and we hope that there's a succeeding activities for the development or the revision. We hope that all the countries present here today are also consulted so we can have our comments and recommendation and suggestion to that, and how those other delegates in the previous consultation and delegation ensure that all the comments of the countries or members are also given in that stages or processes, because there's no one size fits all. If we are representing, like for example, we are coming from a regional network that we are speaking on behalf of this specific country, but we hope there is a level of consultation as well to different countries and young people across the globe in the global south. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. So it sounds like a question on the pact itself, and I invite Ali to kindly respond.
Do you want me to take it?
To respond to his question.
Yeah. Could you kindly summarize, because there was a lot of distortion in the voice, so I lost a good chunk of that.
My questions focus on, is there a chance for us, an opportunity to be part of the remaining activities for the review of the pact, for us to have our comments and suggestions, particularly on the language used in the document to ensure the inclusivity, including the adolescent and young people in the global south? Thank you.
Okay, insofar as the participation of the young people is concerned, like I was mentioning earlier that we were not so lucky as such to be part of the processes as you guys are right now, and I've seen you Ratna and a few other colleagues that I've been engaging with on a frequent basis in terms of the wonderful work that you've been doing. What I feel is, for the young people to be at the center of this discourse, one emphasis that each individual should have in the bottom of your heart is to make sure that your voice is meaningfully heard and acted upon as a contribution and not have it tokenized as such, right? And that's where what you need to put in the hard hour, basically, in terms of understanding, the technicalities of some of the different processes. And I think all of us together, especially the civil society organizations in this region and even beyond, would love to be there to not just, help in trying to build that level of capacity, but also take those voices and concerns and aspirations that you have forward into the processes, where it matters.
Thank you, Ali. If you could kindly hold, I think the microphone's not working.
When we talk of data, we generally focus on mere numbers, but while working on the grassroots, we often come across the intersectionalities behind the data, which often talk of democracy and inclusion. For example, whose data it is, or how that data is coming into that particular number. So, in terms of data, how do we ensure that the stories behind the data are captured meaningfully and captured in the true sense, so that data is not mere abstraction of the numbers, but also what exactly and whose data, or the intersectionalities that the data is bringing with the numbers. So how do we ensure that inclusion with the numbers and along with the stories?
Do you want to also mention to whom you're directing this question to?
Maybe either Ali or Yash could take the question.
Probably Yash can go, yeah.
Okay, thank you. This is a great question because I'm a data scientist, by the way. I have a master's in data science. And there's a constant struggle between quantitative data and qualitative data when it comes to reporting. And I think something Ali talked about, what are the purpose of these institutions that exist in our world? And what is the message they're trying to get? And you can easily modify data to tell whatever story you want. And with quantitative data, it's easier. And at last year's UNGA Action Days, I was on a panel. I think Yugratna was in the room with me, and the session was about how do we take into consideration the different forms of data that exist and collect them and report on them. A really good model is UNDP is working with Save the Children, which is an organization which pushes for civil society rights of children in all forms at national and global level. They created this UNDP, this data collection reporting dashboard, which not only collects data in terms of numbers, but also stories of children. And it was a very successful program. And we are pushing for other UN entities also to integrate this qualitative data collection platform and report on it. The biggest challenge for intersectionality, you use the word intersectionality, is that many countries do not collect data about some demographics. And sometimes the challenge is that the countries do not want to collect the data on certain demographics, because once you start collecting data, if you report on the data, it might not always look good. And that's why we have even the shadow reports mechanisms in the UN. And I think that's where the civil society part comes in, is we are responsible to ensure that those stories that are not making into the mainstream or the version that the member state is representing captures the ground reality. But there are models out there. I'm happy to share the resources with the person who asked the question on how you can do qualitative data and reporting. A lot of LGBTI organizations around the world actually do primarily qualitative data in the reports because it's easy to forget that these are people's experiences.
Thank you, Yash. In the interest of time, I think we are really sorry we are not able to take any more questions, but I'd like to wrap the panel. Thank you to our brilliant speakers. Their sharing around the 3 outcome documents definitely has helped us increase our understanding on the importance of these documents in taking forward the sustainable development agenda from the young people's lens. So yes, thank you very much. Thanks, Yug. Thanks, Ali and Yash. And I pass it back to Fitria.
Thank you so much, Shamala, Ali, and Yash for the presentations and also the moderations. And that the first panel has concluded our session and this afternoon. It is already afternoon. I believe some of you already a little bit hungry or much bit hungry. I'm not sure. So yeah, I hope that the sessions are already fruitful for you to gather more informations and navigate how you want to put your recommendations in our call to action discussion this afternoon. All right. So we are moving to the lunch break, which everyone should be back around 1:30 in this hall again. And our lunch is next to our room.